So here we are today. We are at, let me get the date right, May 6th, 2023. And we are so fortunate and honored to have two very talented and eminent scholars and theater people. We have Paul McComas, who will be doing enacting Ray Bradbury, and he has an illustrious career as a writer, playwright, actor, literary figure, and he can fill in the other blanks. And we have Jason Aukerman, who is the head of the Ray Bradbury Center for Research. Is that the correct title? Anyway, I think that's close to it, in Indianapolis. And we invite everyone who's going to Indianapolis to visit that center because we want to support our Ray Bradbury Center. And Jason is also publishing and doing many conventions and events all over the world, probably now with Zoom, about Ray Bradbury. So with that said, I will go to my second slide, if I have it. And there, it's a little bit degraded, but I hope you can see this. It's not the reconstructed one, but the original Ray Bradbury garage office. And those that know Ray Bradbury know the many things he said about how he got his inspirations from this wonderful pile of stuff. Yeah. And I think it's important to actually show that because we'll be talking about it, but you see his dinosaur there right in the center, a very important object, a sacred object to Ray Bradbury. So with all that, I'm going to stop the share. And now my speakers are going to have to help me on this. And how do I get up to share? I'm having a terrible time with my controls. Oh, there it is. Stop share. One of you is going first. we discussed, oh, Paul. No, Jason is going first. All right. Yeah. So if you will all put your, first of all, everybody's muted. So everybody go into gallery view. Not gallery, speaker view. I'm sorry, the other thing. And I did hit the record button, didn't I?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you all see did you hear the woman's voice saying this is being recorded? Yeah. Okay. Because I didn't hear it for some reason on my computer.
When you're the one that hits record, you don't hear it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I turn it over now to Jason and Professor Jason Aukerman.
Well, thank you so much, Gloria, and for all of you being here. I understand this is a hard science fiction club. And I just want to thank you for making a little space for Ray Bradbury because you could make the argument that very, very few of his stories, if any, would fit the category of traditional hard science fiction. And I've got some comments I can make about that after Paul's performance. I've got those in reserve just in case they're needed. But for now, in order to set things up for Paul, I'd just like to share a version. I've adapted it for this group, but Paul and I met last November in Chicago, Illinois, when Ray Bradbury was inducted into the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame. And Paul did one of his wonderful performances there, and I made some remarks about Bradbury's life, and I've taken those and adjusted those and created a very, very short lecture. Hopefully an informal one. But I call this Ray Bradbury's Abiding Influence. What Ray Bradbury wanted most in life, more than his desire to be loved and appreciated, above his passion for pineapple milkshakes, banana cream pie, and guacamole, and beyond his fascination with the planet Mars, was an assurance of immortality. This desire to cheat death, at least in some respect, was rooted in an amalgamation of childhood traumas and juvenile epiphanies that happened not far from Chicago, Illinois, where I was given this speech, in Waukegan, Illinois, not far from where Paul is right now. Bradbury frequently spoke about two events that he remembered from that early part of his life that sparked his desire to, quote unquote, live forever. One of these events involved Bradbury learning of a little girl drowning in Lake Michigan. This event would inspire one of Bradbury's early short stories titled The Lake. And it proved instrumental in launching the author's 7-decade professional writing career. Another encounter with death occurred at age 10 when Ray Bradbury learned of the passing of his silent film idol, Lon Chaney, in 1930. Upon learning this news, the young Bradbury realized that if a seemingly supernatural, larger-than-life human being can die, one who graced the silver screens and his nightmares throughout his young childhood, could die, then death was certainly going to find him someday as well. Sobering realizations for somebody who hasn't yet reached his teenage years. Bradbury also often recounted an epiphany that came on the heels of these morbid realizations. His father would sometimes take Ray and his older brother Skip on what they would call berrying expeditions. That's not as morbid as it sounds. They were collecting berries for pies and fruit. Through Lake County countryside in Waukegan. And at age 12, while he was on one of those berry picking adventures, he discovered that he was alive. It was a strange epiphany, an experience that he recaptured decades later in his 1957 short story, Illumination. And it was later transferred untitled into the opening pages of his novelized story cycle, Dandelion Wine. This was a Whitman-esque experience. In fact, life-affirming metaphors, as well as the opposing metaphors of terror surrounding our abiding fear of death, would become a foundation for Ray Bradbury's very unique writing style. A combination of experiences blended into his memories of late summer and early fall 1932. That autumn, a late season carnival came to Waukegan, and there Bradbury attended Mr. Electrico's sideshow. It was a carnival attraction. The entertainer used a long sword and a barrage of static electricity to transfer the charge harmlessly to audience volunteers, usually invoking an appropriate magical command of some sort during the transfer. Electrico noticed a captivated member of his audience, brought him forward, and commanded the adolescent Bradbury to live forever. This strange and inspiring encounter at the carnival haunted Bradbury for the rest of his life. From this point on, Bradbury's quest was to attain immortality. But how does one do that? It was through his frequent visits to the public library, reinforced perhaps by the admonition of Mr. Electrical, where he learned how to extend his life indefinitely. Always an eccentric, Bradbury connected deeply with books. To him, these were not inanimate objects, but conduits for interacting with some of the most intelligent, interesting, and creative minds in all of history. To him, the author could never die so long as the author's written works were read and appreciated long after the author's passing. Perhaps he too could forge his own path to a place on these bookshelves alongside the imaginations of the people he most admired: Hemingway, Steinbeck, Welty, Dickinson, Dickens, and many others, to be taken down, read, and reimagined in the minds of readers for generations to come. And he did. Nearly all of Bradbury's works remain in print, and they are continually reimagined in film, television, and theater. His career intersected an impressively broad spectrum of American cultural history. He was deeply connected with Hollywood, where his stories and books were adapted for feature films and television, but his influence reached even broader cultural stages. Throughout his life, he defended public libraries and First Amendment rights, and eventually became one of the most prominent public advocates for space exploration. While he is most well known for his fiction, having published more than 400 stories and 27 book-length works, In my editing, I didn't finish that thought, and I cannot recall where I was going with it. Forgive me. Bradbury's rise to literary prominence is reflected in his early career appearances in 2 O. Henry Prize anthologies and 4 American Best Short Stories volumes. As his career progressed, he continued receiving impressive recognitions via the Benjamin Franklin Award, the World Fantasy Award for Lifetime Achievement, and the Grandmaster Award from the Science Fiction Writers of America. Bradbury was also an Academy Award nominated screenwriter and an award-winning television writer. In 2000, Bradbury was awarded the National Book Foundation Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. 4 years later, he received the National Medal of Arts, and his 2007 Pulitzer Prize citation recognized his distinguished, prolific, and deeply influential career as an unmatched author of science fiction and fantasy. Bradbury's influence, however, and I think this is a piece that this group will appreciate. Bradbury's influence, however, is not limited to the North American continent. He's one of the most widely translated authors in the world. His French readers were particularly drawn to his surreal short fiction, and he was eventually awarded the French Order of Arts and Letters in 2007. Bradbury's contributions as a space-age visionary expanded his influence into the next frontier. During the 1960s, Bradbury emerged on an international level as one of the most popular and dynamic advocates for space exploration. His award-winning articles for Life magazine excited millions of readers about humanity's potential to reach the stars. And he became a frequent speaker at Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And if I may break from the script just briefly, the first time he was called out there was in the mid-1960s to speak with most of the astronauts. Gus Grisham's crew was not there. They were training, but all of the other astronauts and key players in NASA were at a conference, and Bradbury was invited to come speak. And he was scared to death. He never went to college. He was too poor. And he thought, I never went to college a day in my life. I'm literate. I am not numerate. These are some of the smartest, most intelligent, and fittest people in the world. What do I have to offer? But Bradbury's heroes were the astronauts. When Kennedy said, "We choose to go to the moon," Bradbury could not have been more excited. And so he summoned his courage. He went and he gave one of his classic eccentric, charismatic speeches. And then afterwards, he learned why he was asked to come and speak. Because the people at this event read his short stories when they were younger in the Pulp Fiction magazines. And his dreams of reaching the stars became their dreams. And then he realized, I have had a role to play in this. I'm not going to figure out how to make the rockets fly and break Earth's gravity. But I can serve as imagination and inspiration. And he was called to speak at JPL and Caltech dozens of times for the remainder of his career. And he never, ever passed up an opportunity to do so. His broad influence is reflected in numerous global interplanetary achievements. For example, the Phoenix Mars lander brought a digitized copy of Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles to the Red Planet, where it remains today. On August 22nd, 2012, just 10 weeks after Bradbury's passing, the rover Curiosity's touchdown point on Mars was renamed Bradbury Landing. Additionally, scientists and astronauts who came of age reading Bradbury's works have named a moon crater, an asteroid, and several Martian terrain features in his honor. Bradbury's science fiction stories approach space travel with a sense of childlike wonder. And that sense of wonder was imparted to many of his readers. His dreams of space became their dreams, and this inspiring influence eventually led to friendships with astronauts and other essential NASA figures. It is certainly possible, though difficult, to overstate Bradbury's importance as a 20th century American writer. But it is impossible to deny his wide-ranging cultural significance. Scholars of 20th century American film, history, space exploration, television, and literature cannot broadly examine what was going on in the United States during the latter half of the 20th century without acknowledging, on some level, Bradbury's pervasive influence. And I will end there. I've got notes if it's relevant later, if we would like to talk about Bradbury's dubious inclusion into hard science fiction. More than happy to. I've got some thoughts on that, but I've been dying to hear my good friend Paul McComas perform again. It's been since November, and I can tell you we are all in for a treat. So, Paul, I'm going to mute myself and shut up and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jason. And now for Paul.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Jason. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. Well, we're all very fortunate to have Jason with us. He is probably the foremost Bradbury expert around, and I always enjoy hearing some version of his introduction, which is a perfect segue into getting into the work itself. Hard science fiction. Fiction with hard science in it. And I think we would typically think of rockets and astrophysics and such. My big brother is an astrophysicist, as it happens, but I'm more interested in a different kind of hard science. And I think the ones I'm about to list do qualify. Paleontology is a hard science. Marine biology is a hard science. Herpetology. Oceanography is not about outer space, but what we might call lower space, beneath the earth. And it goes down a long way, 9 miles or so. And it's in some ways as much a mystery as what's up there. So I want to read to you arguably a hard science fiction short story and one of my favorites, The Foghorn. Feel free to dim the lights. This one's a little bit eerie. It was first published in 1951 in the Saturday Evening Post, 72 years ago. Hey, she's good, Gloria, you've dimmed the lights. I'm going to make a quick costume change here while I continue to introduce it. On the surface, we would think that this is just a kind of cryptozoology tale, or a fishing tale in the sense of, this is a tall tale about a whopper. It's actually about much more. Ray's work was always about more than meets the eye. The Foghorn by Ray Bradbury. This will take probably about 22 minutes, and then I'll probably spend about 3 minutes just talking about what I see, again, under the surface, as it were. Out there in the cold water far from land, we waited every night for the coming of the fog, and it came, and we oiled the brass machinery and lit the fog light up in the stone tower, feeling like two tiny birds in the gray sky. McDunn and I sent that light touching out, red, then white, then red again, to eye the lonely ships. And if they did not see our light there in Lonesome Bay, there was always our voice, the great deep cry of our foghorn shuddering through the rags of mist to startle the gulls away, like decks of scattered cards, and to make the waves turn high and foamy. It's a lonely life, said McDunn, but you're used to it now, aren't you, Johnny? Yes, I said, you're a good talker, thank the Lord. Well, it's your turn tomorrow on land, he said, smiling, to dance the ladies around and drink gin, eh? What do you think about McDunn? I asked, when I leave you out here alone. The mysteries of the sea. McDunn lit his pipe. It was 7:15 of a cold November evening, the heat on, the light switching its tail in 200 directions, the foghorn rumbling in the high throat of the tower. There wasn't a town for 100 miles down the coast, just a road which came lonely through the dead country to the sea, with few cars on it, and then a stretch of 2 miles of cold water out across Lonesome Bay to our rock, and rare few ships. Aye, repeated McDunn, the mysteries of the sea. You know, the ocean is the biggest damn snowflake ever. See, it rolls and swells 1,000 shapes and colors, no two alike. Strange. One night years ago, I was here alone when all of the fish of the sea surfaced out there. Something made them swim in and lie in the bay, sort of trembling, and stare up at the tower light going red, white, across them so that I could see their funny eyes. I turned cold. They were like a big peacock's tail moving out there until midnight. And then without so much as a sound, they slipped away. The million of them was gone. I kind of think maybe in some way they came all those miles to worship. Strange, but think how the tower must look to them. Standing 70 feet above the water, that God's light flashing out from it, and the tower declaring itself with a monstrous voice. Well, they never came back, those fish. But don't you think for a while maybe they thought they were in the divine presence? I shivered. I looked out at the long gray lawn of the sea stretching away into nothing and nowhere. Oh, the sea is full. McDunn puffed his pipe nervously, blinking. He had been nervous all day and he hadn't said why. For all our engines and all our submarines, it'll be 10,000 centuries before we set foot on the real bottom of the sunken lands, in the fairy kingdoms down there, and then we'll know real terror. Think of it, it's still the year 300,000 before Christ down under there, while we've paraded around with trumpets, lopping off each other's countries and heads. Creatures have been living beneath the sea, 12 miles deep and cold, in a time as old as the beard on a comet. Yes, I said, it's an old world. Come on, said McDunn. I got something special I've been saving up to tell you. We ascended the 80 steps, talking and taking our time. At the top, McDunn switched off the room lights so there'd be no reflection in the plate glass. The great eye of the light was humming, turning easily in its oiled socket, and the foghorn was blowing steadily once every 15 seconds. It sounds like an animal, don't it? McDunn nodded to himself. A big lonely animal crying in the night, sitting here on the edge of 10 million years, calling out to the deeps, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And the deeps do answer. Yes, they do. You've been here now for 3 months, Johnny, so I better prepare you. About this time of year, something comes to visit the lighthouse. The swarms of fish, like you said, oh, no. This is something else. I put off telling you because you might think I'm daft, but tonight is the latest I can put it off. For if my calendar is marked right from last year, tonight is the night it comes. Now, I won't go into detail. You'll have to see it for yourself. Just sit down there. Now, if you want, tomorrow you can pack your duffel and take the motorboat into land and drive your car away from the Cape and head on back to some little inland town and keep your light burning at night. And I won't question or blame you. It's happened 3 years now, and this is the only time anyone has been here with me to verify it. You wait and you watch. Half an hour passed, with only a few whispers between us. When we grew tired of waiting, McDunn began describing some of his ideas to me. He had some theories about the foghorn itself. One day, many years ago, a man walked along and stood in the sound of the ocean on a cold, sunless shore and said, we need a voice to call across the water, to warn ships. I'll make one. Now, I'll make a voice that is like an empty bed beside you all night long, and like an empty house when you open the door, and like the trees in autumn with no leaves, a sound like the birds flying south, crying, and a sound like a November wind and the sea on the hard, cold shore. I'll make a sound that is so alone that no one can miss it, that whoever hears it will weep in their souls. And they'll call it a foghorn. And whoever hears it will know the sadness of eternity and the briefness of life. The foghorn blew. Now, I made up that story, said McDunn, to try and explain why this thing keeps coming back to the lighthouse. Every year, the foghorn calls, I think, and it comes, there, he pointed out to the deeps. Something was swimming toward the lighthouse. Now, it was a cold night, as I said. The high tower was cold, the light coming and going, and the foghorn calling and calling through the raveling mist. You couldn't see far and you couldn't see plain, but there was the deep sea moving flat and quiet in the night, the color of gray mud. And here was the two of us alone in the high tower, and there far out at first was a ripple, followed by a wave, a rising, a bubble, a bit of froth, and then from the surface of the cold sea came a head, a large head, dark colored, with immense eyes, and then a neck, and then not a body, but more neck and more and more. The head rose a full 40 feet above the water on a slender and beautiful neck. Only then did the body, like a little island of black coral and shells, drip up from the subterranean. There was a flicker of tail. In all, I estimated the monster at 90 to 100 feet long. I don't know what I said. I said something. Steady, boy, steady, whispered McDunn. It's impossible, I said. No, Johnny, we're impossible. It is like it always was since tens of millions of years ago. It hasn't changed. It's us and the land that have changed, become impossible. Us. It swam slowly and with a great majesty out in the icy waters far away. The fog came in and went about it, momentarily erasing its shape. One of the monster eyes caught and held and flashed back our immense light, red, white, like a disc held very high and sending a message in primeval code. It was as silent as the fog through which it swam. It's a dinosaur of some sort? I crouched down, holding to the stair rail. Yes, one of the tribe. But they died out. No, only hid away in the deeps. Deep, deep down in the deepest of deeps. Isn't that a word now, Johnny? A real word. It says so much, the deeps. There's all the coldness and darkness in the world in a word like that. What do we do? We got our job. We can't leave. Besides, we're safer here than in any boat trying to get back to land. That thing is as big as a destroyer and almost as swift. But here, why does it come here? The next moment I knew, for the foghorn blew and the monster answered. A cry came across 1,000,000 years of water and mist, a cry so anguished and alone, it shuddered in my head and my body. The monster cried out at the tower, the foghorn blew, the monster roared again, the foghorn blew, the monster opened its great toothed mouth, and the sound that came from it was the sound of the foghorn itself, lonely and vast and far away, the sound of isolation, a viewless sea, a cold night, apartness. That was the sound. Now, whispered McDunn, now do you know why it comes here? I nodded. All year long, Johnny. That poor monster there lying far out, 1,000 miles at sea, and 20 miles deep maybe, biding its time, perhaps 1,000,000 years old, this one creature. Think of it. Waiting 1,000,000 years. Could you wait that long? Maybe it's the last of its kind. I sort of think that's true. Anyway, here come men on land and build this lighthouse, and set up their foghorn and sound it out toward the place where you bury yourself in sleep and see memories of a world where there were thousands like yourself, but now you're alone, all alone in a world that's not made for you, a world where you have to hide. But the sound of the foghorn comes and goes, and you stir from the muddy bottom of the deeps, and your eyes open like the lenses of two huge cameras, and you move slow, for you have the ocean on your shoulders, heavy, but that foghorn comes through 1,000 miles of water, faint and familiar, and the furnace in your belly stokes up and you begin to rise, slow. You feed yourself on minnows, on rivers of jellyfish, and you rise slow through the autumn months, through September when the fogs start, through October with more fog and the horn still calling you on. And then late in November, after pressurizing yourself day by day, a few feet higher every hour, you are near the surface and still alive. You've got to go slow. If you surfaced all at once, you'd explode. So it takes you all of 3 months to surface, and then a number of days to swim through the cold waters to the lighthouse. And there you are now, out there in the night, Johnny, the biggest damn monster in creation. And here's the lighthouse calling to you, with a long neck like your long neck, sticking way up out of the water, and a squat body like your body, and most important of all, a voice like your voice. Do you understand now, Johnny? Do you understand? The foghorn blew. The monster answered. I saw it all. I knew it all. The millions of years waiting alone for someone to come back who never came back. The million years of isolation at the bottom of the sea. The insanity of time there, while the skies cleared of reptile birds, and the giant ground sloth and mastodon and saber-tooth had their day and then sank in tar pits, and men ran around like ants upon the hills. The foghorn blew, the monster answered. Last year, said McDunn, that creature swam round and round, all night, not coming near. Puzzled, I'd say. Afraid, maybe, and a bit angry after coming all this way. But the next day, unexpectedly, the fog lifted, the sun came out fresh, the sky was as blue as a painting, and that monster swam right off, away from the heat and the silence, and it didn't come back. I suppose it's been brooding on it for a year now, thinking it all over from every which way. The monster was only 50 or so yards off now, and it and the foghorn were still crying to each other. As the lights hit them, the monster's eyes were fire and ice, fire and ice. That's life for you, said McDunn. Someone always waiting for someone who never comes home. Always someone loving something more than that thing loves them. And after a while, you want to destroy whatever that thing is so it can hurt you no more. Suddenly, the monster began rushing at the lighthouse. Ye gods, cried McDunn. The foghorn blew, but McDunn quickly switched it off. The monster stopped and froze in place. The ensuing minute of silence was so intense that we could hear our hearts pounding in the glassed area of the tower, could hear the slow greased turn of the light. The beast's great lantern eyes blinked. Its mouth gaped. It gave a sort of rumble like a volcano. It twitched its head this way and that, as if to seek the sound now dwindled off into fog. It peered at the lighthouse. It rumbled again, and then its eyes caught fire. It threshed the water and sped toward the tower. McDunn, I cried, switch the horn back on. McDunn fumbled with the switch, but even after he flipped it back on, the monster was rearing up right before us. I had a glimpse of its gigantic flipper claws, fish skin glittering in webs between its finger-like projections, now pawing at the tower. The huge eye on the right side of its anguished head glittered before me like a cauldron into which I might drop screaming. The tower shook. The foghorn cried. The monster cried. then seized the tower and gnashed at the glass, which shattered in upon us. McDunn grabbed my arm. Downstairs, now! The tower rocked, trembled, and started to give. The foghorn and the monster roared in unison as we stumbled and half fell down the stairs. Quick, Johnny, quick! We reached the bottom just as the tower buckled down toward us. We ducked under the stairs in the small stone cellar. There were 1,000 concussions as the rocks rained down. The foghorn stopped abruptly, broken, destroyed. Then with a deafening crash, the tower fell. We knelt together, McDunn and I, holding tight to each other while our world exploded. And then it was over, and there was nothing but darkness and the wash of the sea on the raw stones. Just that and the other sound. Whisper, listen, said McDunn quietly, listen. We waited a moment, and then I began to hear it. First a great sucking in of air, and then the lament, the bewilderment, the loneliness of the great beast folded over and above us as the briny reek of its body filled the cellar air. The monster gasped and cried, and then I began to realize that the light was gone, the tower was gone, the horn that had called it across a million ears. Yeah, everything was gone, and the monster was opening its mouth and sending out great sounds, the sounds of a foghorn, again and again. And ships far out at sea, not finding our light, not seeing anything, but passing and hearing late that night, must have thought, there it is, the lonely sound, the lonesome bay sound. We've rounded the cape, all's well. And so it went for the rest of that long, long night. At dawn, the creature departed. The sun was hot and yellow by afternoon when the rescuers came to dig us out from our stoned-in cellar. It fell apart is all, McDunn told them gravely. We had a few bad knocks from the waves and it just crumbled. He pinched my arm conspiratorially. We would not tell. There was nothing to see. The ocean was calm, the sky blue. The only thing was a great algae stink from the green matter that covered the fallen tower stones and the shore rocks. Flies buzzed about. The ocean washed empty onto the shore. The next year, they built a new lighthouse, but by that time, I had a job in the little town and a wife and a good small warm house that glowed yellow on autumn nights, the doors locked at night, the chimney burning smoke. As for McDunn, he was master of the new lighthouse, built to his own specifications out of steel reinforced concrete. Just in case, he said to me. And the monster? It's gone away, McDunn told me. It's gone back to the deeps, Johnny. It's learned you can't love anything that much in this world. It's gone into the deepest deeps to wait another 1,000,000 years. Oh, that poor thing, waiting out there while man comes and goes on this pitiful little planet, waiting and waiting. The new lighthouse was completed in November. I drove down alone one foggy evening, late, and parked my car and looked across the gray waters and listened to the new horn sounding once, twice, 3, 4 times a minute, far out there by itself. I sat in my car listening. I couldn't see the lighthouse or even the light standing out in Lonesome Bay. I could only hear the horn, the horn, the horn. It sounded like a lost soul calling. And I sat there, alone, wishing there was something I could say. That's the Foghorn. And I'd like to say just a few words about what I find in this story. That last line, wishing there was something I could say, is somewhat ironic since the author, to my mind, has said a great deal. There are just 3 characters, or maybe 4, Johnny, our point of view character, narrator, our eyes and ears, and nose with the algae reek at the end. McDunn, the voice of experience, knowledge, wisdom, empathy, and I think we could say philosophy. The so-called monster, probably some kind of plesiosaur, with whom our sympathies strangely lie. We relate to its loneliness, its loss, sense of grief. And I think McDunn, if we move from the hard science now to the softer science or the social science, psychology, I think McDunn, who mostly works alone in the lighthouse, Johnny's been there 3 months and now he's left. I think McDunn is projecting an awful lot of his loneliness, solitude, feeling like the last of his breed onto this monster. It doesn't mean that he's not right in some of his speculations about the creature. That's not mutually exclusive to the notion that he is projecting his own loneliness onto it. So we have here a ripping good yarn, a tall tale, a legend, a fable, a fish story. But underneath that, as if we're going down into the sea, we have a maritime mystery about the mystery of existence, of life itself, and the passing epochs, and of man's small place within that passing of time, and of the notion, as Shakespeare said it, that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. Loneliness, isolation, abandonment, solitude, these are the common emotions into which we can tap from this story, but they come through the most unlikely of sources. The loneliness of Ray Bradbury, perhaps, growing up, as I would imagine, feeling like something of an outsider where his peer group is concerned. And so you can find the loneliness of Ray in the Martian Chronicles, among the settlers, in Fahrenheit 451, among those looking to maintain literacy and books. There's a whole chapter in Dandelion Wine about the lonely one. That's his actual name. My favorite chapter in that book is about Miss Helen Loomis and William Forrester and their loneliness, which is cured for a time by each other's company, despite the fact that she's 3 times his age. The Illustrated Man, something wicked. I could go on in talking about, and you know, there is a better expert on these things right now in Professor Aukerman. But I think we've all experienced particular isolation during the pandemic. And so this comes to us at a time when we've all spent a lot of time alone. And the last thing I'll say for now is that if you compare this story with another of Ray's dinosaur stories, The Sound of Thunder, we get 2 examples of how man's creations, technology, can really screw things up. And the natural creation, the dinosaur, is not really to blame. It's us. The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, by the way, the film, 1953, was partially inspired by the Foghorn. You can see that this is not a plesiosaur. It's a non-existent, it's a fictitious dinosaur called the Raydosaurus that was named after both Ray and Ray Harryhausen, his friend, the special effects wizard. Here's a picture that I took in Lake Champlain in New York State, and you see the wake. And as for this head, yeah, maybe I drew that in with ink and maybe I didn't. I'll just leave that for each of you to decide.
Well, thank you, Paul. That was very moving and it was deep.
Deep.
We certainly appreciate having a reading. That's something that rarely happens in our group. And I hope to do more of it. Were you here when I said to Jason that we have this other group affiliated with this group called the Planet Zoo Players? And in that, we have a man in England who uses 2 cameras. We're putting together a reading of H.G. Wells' The Crystal Egg. And so we're gonna have special effects, 2 cameras.
Wow.
And we could get Phil to come and, we could use some of that level of, whatever. When hopefully you'll come back and read something else, we could make it more of a 2-camera operation. And you could really put in things, clips or whatever. So thank you both so much. You complimented each other so very well. I'm sure that I'm speaking for everyone, because one of you was doing the Ray, bringing him, embodying him, and the other one of you has such an encompassing presentation about Ray. And I guess I have one remark to make. We know the man who was the principal investigator of the Phoenix Mars lander that did take the book from Ray, The Martian Chronicles, and it's on Mars now. That's Peter Smith. And Peter has the preface in my collection, or I should say our collection. I don't know if you could see this, Orbiting Ray Bradbury's Mars. And it was the first collection of any science fiction writer that covered all these different areas: biographical, anthropological, literary, scientific, and film critique. Well, anyway, the PI of the Mars lander, I don't know if you can see it, wrote the preface in which he tells what he read by Ray Bradbury that inspired him to become an astronomer and eventually to lead the Phoenix Mars lander and put Ray's book on Mars. So if you want to get this out of the library or whatever, and in fact, I'll give each of you a copy for being so kind to speak. If you just send me your mailing addresses, I'll send you a copy and you can read what Peter has to say about the Phoenix Mars lander.
There'll be signed copies, I hope.
Sure.
Thank
I mean,
you.
I'm only the humble editor. It should be all of these people that were in it. And I would say to put one out in front of everybody else, maybe unfairly, Grace Dillon. She's Anishinaabe, which is one of the indigenous cultures, wrote an excellent piece called Survivance Stories about reading Ray Bradbury on and off the reservation. And then Grace went on in 2021 to do the first collection of science fiction of indigenous people. And it was put out by University of Arizona. It's called Walking the Clouds.
Wow.
So you see all these strings that Ray Bradbury, he had such an associative mind, and it just goes on now. He's gone, but it's going on.
I know enough about certain Ogallala and other tribes' origin stories to know that there's already a significant overlap between some of those origin stories. I'm thinking specifically the origin of so-called Devil's Tower, which actually is properly called Bear Lodge or Bear Teepee. The white settlers got the translation wrong, as they got so much wrong.
Well, I have mixed feelings about naming things after Ray. If you read the Martian.
Oh no, it's not named after Ray.
No, he didn't like naming things on Mars after Earthlings. And so what did they do? They named things after Ray. And that's ironic in a way, because he didn't like that.
Well, the origin story for so-called Devil's Tower, which is also the origin story for the Big Dipper, it almost sounds like science fiction. Listening to the way that humans way back then tried to make sense of what they saw in their world. And isn't that, to some extent, what science fiction writers are doing, trying to make some sense of, well, their world through the allegories of science fiction, fantasy, horror. Twilight Zone leaps to mind. Rod Serling had so much to say about the world and the nation in which he was living, and he chose to do it largely through allegory and use those genres as stalking horses to turn the lens a little bit back on our world and maybe exaggerate things a little bit. And of course, that's what Ray was doing with books like Fahrenheit 451.
Could I say one more word about Grace Dillon, who wrote the story as being an indigenous person? She left sentences in the Anishinaabe language without translations on purpose in her essay. And I got flack from my editors saying they will never approve this. She's got to put a translation. And I leave it up to you to understand why she wanted no translation. And I fought and I got those, and they're in here without a translation. It's not enough that it ruins your ability to understand, but she was making a point putting those in with no translation, because white men, I say, often think, oh, I can sum this up, what that means in that language. I'll sum it up. And when you sum it up in our language, you've destroyed it.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm
Authenticity
saying?
comes.
So that there are things in here that you're ain't going to find anywhere else.
She's maintaining the authenticity by retaining some of that language.
Difference.
Yeah.
No, she's saying difference remains difference. You can't just bring it into your culture, sum it up, and then put it in your word, because your language is a whole universe. My language is a whole universe. They're not identical. And you're taking things that don't exist in your language and you're trying to say that that's what well, anyway, we won't get into that, but you understand what I'm saying. So I thought about it, and I thought I could say, oh, Grace, you're going to have to change that, or I can't include you. But I said no, and I made a real strong case, and he said, we'll hand it in, and maybe they won't approve that story, but they didn't notice it or something, and it got in.
Well, it becomes a metaphor for the fact that ultimately there are things that we simply don't understand in the world.
But somebody else does in their world.
Yeah.
And, they exist as well as we. And it's
Right.
two, it's not one. It's not
Right.
something that one mind can draw,
Nope. All of the above.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, do we have other people and their questions? I hope to hear. I know Bob probably, he has one already in chat. If we can take that one first, because it's been sitting there.
What is it? What is it? The question?
It's in chat. Can you open your chat window? Do you know how to do that?
I'll try.
There's a little button that you can click on the more if you don't see chat. It's 3 dots and it says more.
Yeah, more.
And then when you click on that, if chat wasn't appearing.
It's not captions and breakout rooms.
So you don't have chat.
I'll go ahead and just.
I found chat. I found chat.
You got it.
Okay.
And then you have to click on it.
Right.
So-
I got it. Got it.
The relationship with Rod Serling and Bradbury. Is Bob still here?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I could speak just briefly on that. They did know each other. Right around the same time that Serling got Twilight Zone off the ground, Bradbury had a hopes of doing a similar science fiction show that did not happen, if I recall correctly. Forgive me, this is coming strictly from memory, which for me is always dangerous. But I think that I think Bradbury may have done well. He did the Electric Grandmother episode based on his story, I Sing the Body Electric, and a couple of others. But I think the relationship was often tense, because I think Bradbury felt that Serling borrowed concepts and ideas from Bradbury's stories without giving appropriate credit. And I will say, I try really hard to be a good expert on Bradbury, but the world's leading expert, I think, has joined this group in the past, and that's the good Dr. Jonathan Eller. There's nobody that holds a candle to John Eller in terms of Bradbury knowledge. Compared to John, I'm still very much a neophyte, and always will be, because John is just one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life. The guy has an astounding memory, and encyclopedic knowledge, not just of Ray Bradbury, but of world history, of military strategy, of pop culture. And I can tell you, I can't speak for John. He's not here. So I'll take this carefully. But through conversations, I'll put it this way. Through conversations I've had with John, I've kind of gotten the impression that Bradbury's issues with Serling were rooted in a bit of jealousy, and maybe felt that maybe some of the accusations were not as well founded as Bradbury had thought that they were. Does that make sense? Yeah. Go ahead, Paul.
Let me speak to that, because I'm something of a Twilight Zone scholar. So the only episode that Ray wrote was the one you mentioned, I Sing the Body Electric.
Okay, thank you.
That's out of 150 episodes over 5 years. Serling wrote 100 of those 150. The others were farmed out to the writers he really trusted most and who were willing to work within the confines of 25-minute televised narratives. Richard Matheson, Charles Beaumont, Earl Hamner, actually, who did the rural episodes of The Twilight Zone and went on to do The Waltons, George Clayton Johnson. And these were all members with Ray of the group, capital T, capital G. Bunch of science fiction and genre writers who gathered occasionally in Los Angeles, where they were all living at the time. Serling was not a member of the group, but he knew them all and drew from that group for the episodes of The Twilight Zone that he did not himself write. I think that Ray's genius did not lend itself particularly well to that 25-minute narrative network TV format in a way that Serling's fiction, short stories and novellas, is not as strong as his TV writing. I think that Serling was really, he was seminal in the golden age, the original golden age of television. He and Paddy Chayefsky and a couple of other people were probably the most important figures during that age, in part because the writing they did was so well suited to this new format. And then, you know, I mentioned Paddy Chayefsky. The story, apocryphal or not, is true. That's actually a Native American expression. These events may or may not have occurred, but the story is true. You get what that means. And the story is that when The Twilight Zone started, Chayefsky said to Serling, "Rod, why on earth would you want to do a spook show for CBS?" And Serling famously replied, "Because the network won't let me do a show about blacks and whites in the Deep South, but I can do one about Martians and Venusians." So there again is this notion of the allegory being used to turn the lens back, a kind of a funhouse mirror way of looking at our own world.
This is why we work so well together, Paul.
Agreed, my Brad brother. That's what we call each other.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions that we might be able to answer? I'm going to have to leave within probably the next 9 minutes, but have really enjoyed the time here and would be happy to field a couple more questions if there are questions to be asked. Oh, Gloria, I think you're muted.
I said, I'm surprised Bob doesn't have a couple more. He's got certainly a lot of tangential connections. Or Bruce, anything from you? Or Nancy or Huali?
I think Bruce
I am all ears. I've just been drinking this all in. I don't have any questions, but yeah, I wanted to say again, this double presentation between the two of you is that's really, really effective. I mean, partly because you're both individually really effective, but having the sort of like two viewpoints on the same topic in the same presentation.
And we have a third, we haven't heard from China. Here's something I thought, and I'm going to field it to Hua. Hua, what is the reputation of Ray Bradbury in China? Can you, is he known there at all?
Yes, very well known. Actually, he was one of the earliest American sci-fi writers to be translated into Chinese and introduced to the sci-fi fans actually in early 1980s. A lot of influential, famous, later became very famous Chinese sci-fi writers all claim that they were profoundly influenced by Ray Bradbury and some other American writers, because before 1980s, mainly the Russian, the Soviet Union sci-fi writers were translated into Chinese, then learned by Chinese sci-fi writers and readers. But in 1980s, American sci-fi writers was translated into Chinese language. So Ray Bradbury was one of the earliest one.
How does he speak to them? What, is there any way, does he have a strand that seems more prominent that appeals to the Chinese readers? You know, is it his anti-colonialism in the Martian Chronicles?
I think,
what?
yeah, mainly the Martian Chronicle.
Mhm.
Yeah, the short stories in that collection was first translated and widely
How about
read
Fahrenheit?
by.
How about
Oh,
Fahrenheit
yeah,
451? That must resonate.
Yeah. Well, yes, of course. Also, because mainly the movie, right? Yeah, people, I think, most of the Chinese readers watch the movie first. Probably some sci-fi
the
fans
old
read
one.
the novel, right?
The old
Of
film
course,
from the
yeah.
1960s, not the new
Oh
one.
yes, yeah. That's I'm talking about
Right.
the old one, of course. Yeah, highly metaphorical, right? Allegorical, of course. Yeah, Chinese readers and audience are able to get that, of course. Yeah,
Amazing. I mean, I
it's
wish he could
amazing,
hear this.
right?
I wish Ray Bradbury, but maybe he is somewhere hearing what you're saying, because this is another
Yeah,
strand that's, going on.
right.
Well, I
think
suppose.
he visited China. Is that right? Or
Oh,
the Ray Bradbury scholars. Do you know he visited China? I
I don't.
believe.
I know he visited Argentina, but I know that he went to Ireland and to the United Kingdom. But he did not. He didn't fly until very late in life, and he never learned how to drive a car. He actually, when he was, I believe it was when his family was trying to establish themselves in Tucson, Arizona. On the way out there, he witnessed a horrific car accident, and he was terrified to drive. He never got behind the wheel of a car. He always had other people drive him. And it was right around the time my mentor, John Eller, who I mentioned earlier, Bradbury did fly out to Colorado to the Air Force Academy, and that's how John met him. But he had only, I think, just recently started agreeing to fly on airplanes at that point.
and he did return to Waukegan, which he
Yes.
he adored Waukegan as it existed in the 1920s and 30s when he knew it. And sometimes you hear criticism from Waukeganites that the Waukegan Ray depicts, calling it Greentown in several works, is not there anymore. And I just say to them, where are the 1920s and 30s, still preserved as they were? Sure, there are some places in the world, but probably not in the United States. Every town has changed. Waukegan has changed, but elements of it are still the same. Jason, before you leave, I had a question for you.
Sure.
And it's an easy one, I think. I think it is. I think I've mentioned to you my favorite piece by Ray is a short story called Hopscotch,
Yes.
which is not a genre piece, although you could say there's sort of a magical realist element to it, in the way that there are such elements to parts of Dandelion Wine. What's your favorite, or your 2 or 3 favorite Bradbury works, and why?
Well, I will tell you, I came to Bradbury pretty late. So many people, when they talk about their first experience with Bradbury, it's at 12 or 13. I somehow made it through high school and college, never being assigned to Bradbury work, but Fahrenheit 451 was high on my list. It was one of the first books. I was an English major in college, and so as soon as I wasn't having stuff assigned for me, that was one of the first books I read, and I appreciated it. But it wasn't until I started teaching. This was fall semester of 2012. And I was working for a university, but not as a faculty member, but they had a shortage of English teachers. And they asked me they knew that my dream job was to be an English professor someday. All of my best friends at the university were on the English faculty. It was a small liberal arts school, about an hour south of Chicago. And so they reached out to me, and I said, yeah, what am I going to teach? And they said, freshman composition. And I thought, oh man, I want to teach literature. I don't want to teach freshman composition. What a boring class to teach. Or at least that was my experience in composition classes. I knew how to write. I didn't know how to teach other people how to write. I did not know what I was doing. But what I know is I learned how to write by writing. And the class met in a computer lab. So every student was sitting at a computer, and I would prepare a lecture thinking that this would take me through the hour. And 15 minutes into the hour, I was out of slides and out of ideas to talk about. And so I just had them fire up the computers and start writing. And I was dealing with just incredible imposter syndrome. I had just finished my first master's degree, but it was an MBA. And at the time in Illinois, if you had a master's in anything, you could teach a 100 level course and be qualified. I believe the accreditation laws have changed since then. And it was late September. And I just sensed the students were getting really skeptical of this and catching on to the fact that I really didn't know what I was doing, because I didn't. And I was looking for some validation for my approach, learning to write by writing. When I ran out of those prompts, or when I ran out of my slides, my presentation, I made up a prompt right there on the spot and had them write towards that prompt. And so I consulted Dr. Google to affirm what I was doing, to maybe give something to students to say, hey, it's not just me that feels this way. And I come across this clip of an elderly gentleman with dark rimmed, thick bottle cap glasses, wearing a white tennis jacket, white shirt, skinny black tie, white tennis shorts, tube socks almost up to his knees. And he's talking about writing persistently. And he talks about how he started writing every day from age 12 of his life. And it wasn't until age 22 he sat down at the typewriter and remembered the story of a little girl going into Lake Michigan and never coming out. And what is this strange thing called death? And he sat there and he wrote the lake. And he said, when I was done, I sat at my computer and I wept because I'd had a breakthrough. I wasn't writing for the right or the left. I wasn't writing for this pulp magazine or that pulp magazine. There's something in me that came out that was pure. And so I got a copy of the October Country and I read the lake or shared that clip with the students. It's since been taken down, and I have not been able to find the documentary to put it in my own collection. But it was Bradbury talking about how he learned how to write. And from that moment on, Bradbury's been an important part of my teaching curriculum. And I still, to this day, Paul, someday I would love to do a dramatic reading of the lake and channel my inner Paul McComas and deliver something like that, because the story has meant so much to me. And I can barely get through it without choking up. It's 50-50, even though I've read it hundreds of times.
That's the highest praise that you can give to an author, right? That you can hardly get through it without choking up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I came to Bradbury late too. Isn't this interesting? Both of us did. Other than his Twilight Zone episode, I didn't read him until I was significantly older. And so maybe there's something to that. We've both wound up with careers that are entwined with Ray, and we both came to him at a time when we were already well educated and had done a lot of reading, had done a lot of writing, and were able to meet him on adult to adult terms, which is not to say anything against those who read him in middle school or high school. I mean, lucky them. Would that we had that opportunity or that foresight or whatever. But when we did come to him, it was maybe closer to where he was at when he wrote than we otherwise would have.
Yeah.
I didn't know that about you, and that you came to him late like I did.
Likewise.
Yeah.
I love teaming up with Paul. Can I leave us with I do need to sign off, but I'd like to leave with a parting thought. That's not my own. I wish that it is, because I agree with it so much. Damon Knight wrote an essay many years ago called When I Was in Knee Pants, Ray Bradbury. And he says this about Ray's work. Bradbury's strength lies in the fact that he writes about things that are really important to us, not the things that we pretend to be interested in, but the fundamental pre-rational fears and longings and desires, the rage at being born, the will to be loved, the longing to communicate, the hatred of parents and siblings, the fear of things that are not the self. And one more, if I can find it here in my notes, forgive me. I should have highlighted them. And my laptop's not coming.
I'll kill time for you by telling the story. Okay, go ahead, Jason.
Oh,
Or I can kill time for you by telling the story of the 10-year-old boys that used to come up to him.
oh, do it.
Yeah. Ray said the 10-year-old boys would come up to him and, are you Ray Bradbury? Yes. You know that book of yours, The Martian Chronicles? Yes. You know that part about the moons of Mars setting in the east? Yes. No. And then Ray would say, so I beat them up.
I'll be damned if I'll be bullied by a 10-year-old.
That's right. I'd be damned if I'll be corrected by a 10-year-old. And of course, he didn't beat them up. But
Right.
What's the larger point? Maybe he isn't the truest hard science fiction writer, because he didn't get all of the details exactly right. But again, there are greater truths that he captured, I think, expertly and very beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find it, Jason?
I didn't, but I've got a thought. But Gloria is waving her hand. She wants.
Well, before you go, I just want to be sure that you saw in the chat that thing that you lost and that you were looking for about him discussing coming to his own voice and writing. I used this for over 20 years, or about maybe 15 years. I taught at the U of A English, and it's called An Evening with Ray Bradbury at Point Loma. And it has students crying and laughing, and he discusses the lake. He discusses almost every one of these nuggets that you get, but it's where he tells people, if you want to make these expensive time mistakes, you can go write a novel, blah, blah, blah. But it's his caring about them. It wasn't all about him. And I see him as different than every other writer, and that this was all directed at others, and his generous spirit and his humor. Students laugh in some parts and they cry in others. It's just called An Evening with Ray Bradbury at Point Loma, and he discusses the lake.
You are so right to point that out, Gloria. It's so he was wonderful in front of a crowd. You know, he was just so dynamic and charismatic, and
not only that,
generous and giving.
Yeah. And I'll just I didn't find, well, I found the quote and I decided it's not as relevant as I thought. The day and night quote resonates with me. I think that there's a lot of truth in that. And I will say for the last half decade, I have gone to many conventions, regional and national and international. And what I've found, especially people who are kind of close to retirement age or above, fandom operates in ways that are very, to me, reminiscent of organized religion that I was brought up with when I was younger. You have the gatekeepers, the dogmatists who say this person belongs, this person does not. And then you also have the evangelists who are willing to make space for everybody. And I find it very, very refreshing that you all have created some space for Ray Bradbury, because there are many people who are very devoted to hard science fiction who will say Bradbury never wrote a science fiction story. And I've got a more inclusive definition of science fiction.
Yeah.
That falls in if it's about a planet, if it's about a place that you could theoretically go to, setting matters in science fiction. And so if the story takes place on Mars, even if it's completely implausible, it still falls under the umbrella of science fiction, though not necessarily hard science fiction. I would like to recommend another person for your club, since this is a hard science fiction club. And Gloria, just email me and I will put you in contact with her. My dear friend, Ree Guthrie, just retired a couple of years ago. She was, I believe, the first person to do her doctoral dissertation on Robert Heinlein. She never got to meet Robert Heinlein, but she knew Ginny quite well. And she has got some fascinating stories. And I will tell you, I met her at the World Science Fiction Convention, introduced myself as the guy from the Ray Bradbury Center.
Mhm.
And she looked at me and said, "Oh, Bradbury.
Well, I think
He
it'd be
wins
good-
all of these awards because he writes all those pretty
Right.
sentences."
Well,
Yeah.
Jason,
And from that moment, Rhea and I have had the best, most good-natured banter about
Wow.
who is the better author and things like that. She is a Heinlein person. I'm a Bradbury person. We are dear friends, and I'm sure she would love to speak to your group at some
I
point.
think if she comes, we have to have Paul do a reading from
A
Heinlein.
dramatic
Well,
reading.
no.
of
He'd be willing to. He
What
has
I want
short
to say,
stories.
what I want to say before Jason leaves is, Jason, I once chaired a panel at a convention about what we all kind of hoped for in the next iteration of Star Trek, the Chris Pine iteration. And I ran into dogmatists like you wouldn't, well, maybe you would believe, who were like, they would say, well, the trailer alone contains 14 violations of canon. And so I as a lifelong Trekkie, I would say, wait a second. Is anyone in this room a biblical literalist? You believe the Bible word for word? You believe, and no one raised their hands. And I said, I didn't think so. There's a very well-educated, smart audience. And yet, I know there are a heck of a lot of Star Trek dogmatists in this room. And if we're not going to buy into this notion that canon is everything, then can we just let new people tell their stories in new ways and not be so concerned with dogma? Same thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well done, Paul. Well done.
And the next
Well
question
done.
was about a violation of dogma that they'd seen in the trailer. What do you-
Great. Well, before Jason takes off, don't forget to send me your mailing address and you too,
Sure.
Paul, so that I can send you a copy, a thank you copy of the, what's it called? Oh, Orbiting Ray Bradbury's Mars.
Wonderful. I will certainly do that. Much love to you all. Thank you so much for
Thank
allowing
you.
me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Jason.
This was
Thank you.
great.
I can stay a little while if anyone has any specific
others?
question about the Foghorn and my take on it and your take on it. I would love to have that conversation. And then the other thing I want to do is mention this organization with which both Jason and I have worked intimately, the Ray Bradbury Experience Museum. So maybe I'll just do that
Right.
for a
Yeah,
minute.
give them a plug. Poor Sandy.
Yeah.
I mentioned her
Sandy-
yet. Yeah.
Sandy Petrosius is the chair of the Ray Bradbury Experience Museum Committee. And the museum is based in Waukegan, Greentown, of course.
Mhm.
Waukegan is famous for two people, Ray Bradbury and who's the other one? Rochester, Jack
Yeah,
Benny.
exactly.
And there are statues of both in front of the library in Waukegan, where I just did 2 days of presentations. It's a wonderful, bigger than life statue of Ray on a rocket riding up toward Mars with a book in his hand, But the museum, it had the misfortune of opening right as pandemic started. And then the second misfortune, once it was all up and the exhibits beautiful, and I was doing presentations there and other people were as well, and then they lost their lease. So the museum still exists, and they bring parts of the exhibit out, some of the exhibits out for things like what we did a couple weeks ago with the library. The rest of it's still in storage, but I believe that, they will find another space, and soon,
Is
I
everybody
think.
frozen?
Wait.
On my screen, everybody's frozen.
Am I frozen? You're not frozen. Raise your hand if you can hear and see me.
I don't
Okay.
know what happened.
Yeah, I
must
think
have
it went
lost
away,
something.
whatever it was. So yeah, it's mostly in storage. They bring certain exhibits out for certain events, but I have great faith that some point soon they're going to find a new space in Waukegan and move all those exhibits and the projector screen and the do-it-yourself, like kids can participate and do things related to dinosaurs and space travel and all of that stuff. I have faith the Ray Bradbury Experience Museum will be back in its own new space, hopefully very soon. And I come to you through Sandy at the museum, and I wouldn't know about your group if Sandy hadn't gotten in touch with Gloria. Gloria, are you still there? I think Gloria fell off.
Yeah.
I think our host fell off, and she made Jason the host
Yeah,
too.
I'm back.
Okay, good.
It's still wait, it says stop, pause, stop recording. I think we are still recording.
Yeah,
And
I
there's
think we
gonna be a
were.
gap in the recording, a few minutes gap.
I talked
Sorry
about the
about that.
museum. I talked about the museum, and I think that was probably
My heart goes out to Sandy. She was gonna meet me at the World Science Fiction Convention on Labor Day last 2022, September. But everything was so busy, and then that was still going then, but then it all hit the fan. And how do you feel? This is a question to you, Paul. Now you've been associated with that museum. Do you think there's going to be room for two centers of Ray Bradbury, or do you feel they're in competition, or they can collaborate?
Oh no, they're very complementary and collaborative.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, if you're talking about Jason's organization,
Yeah, down
right.
in
That's where the archives are, as I understand it.
Mhm.
And
the
so
rebuilt,
that will always be important for people who want to go and do research and look at original manuscripts and that kind of thing.
Right.
But it's more of a scholarly and academic focus, whereas the Ray Bradbury Experience Museum, I mean, it's still very much, it's very intelligently put together, but it is, it's made to be bridging that gap between education and entertainment, where you have exhibits that are entertaining and through which you learn things. Very different from an archival approach.
Right, now I get it a little better. And they have something like that in science up in San Francisco, that children's exploratorium.
Mm-hmm.
Heard about that? They just explore and do all kinds of crazy experiments. So, that it isn't archival or
right. Sense. That exploratorium approach is a major part of what they do. I call it RBEM. That means Ray Bradbury Experience Museum. Yeah.
Well, whatever I can do from this distance, I hear from Sandy a lot, the director of the Ray Bradbury. So we wish them well too, and hope they get back in a good space.
Yeah.
And anything else you want to mention of your projects, Paul, that are upcoming? Or
I don't really want to. I appreciate that invitation, but I think I'd rather not use that this time for that. I'd like to keep the focus on Ray, but I love the Foghorn so much, and a plesiosaur, anything related to huge reptilian marine life, you've got me. I'm a sucker for that.
Okay,
Are there any other questions?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Well, here's one, and this actually relates to the Foghorn, although not in detail. But Ray Bradbury had a positive mania for dinosaurs. And now you've studied both the Foghorn, and you're waving your dinosaur model. So what do you think dinosaurs meant to Ray Bradbury? What was the meaning in his mind? Why was he so drawn to them?
It probably started the same way it started for me when I was 4 or 5. Just they were amazing creatures that weren't here anymore. And I mean, if you think about how long they were around, my God, our presence on Earth is a snap of the finger compared to the hundreds of millions of years, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, that there were dinosaurs. And then as you get older and you start, memorizing their names and being able to draw them and even being able to spell them, which is the hardest part, and you learn more and more about them, it just becomes increasingly, I think, not decreasingly, but increasingly uncanny and bizarre that these walked the earth and flew the skies and swam through the seas. I mentioned, beasts from 20,000 fathoms, and there was more opportunity, I think, to see dinosaur movies than to read about them when we were very, very young. That Radosaurus, spelled R-H-E, again, it never existed. It's kind of a dragon, but I think it was named actually for Ray Harryhausen, the special effects director of the movie, who was a legend in stop motion. But he and Ray Bradbury were friends when they were young. And I think after Ray had moved with his family to Los Angeles, and he met Ray Harryhausen. So the fact that it's called the Radosaurus, really, it serves two functions. It becomes a tribute to two Rays, both of whom grew up just fascinated with dinosaurs. Now, I know that the brain of such a creature would be tiny and probably wouldn't have anything of the emotion and depth that McDonne projects onto it. But it's a very romantic notion, I think, to believe, as McDonne did, that this creature was seeking out its own, and that the foghorn sounded like its own cry, and that it was basically dying of loneliness out there. I just think that's a beautiful romantic notion. Yeah.
Can I tell one of my experiences? I was lecturing on Ray Bradbury, orbiting Ray Bradbury's Mars, at the Santa Monica Public Library. And we had an evening, and a homeless young man came in. He was African American, and he got up and he says, "I want to tell you all the stuff I have in common with Ray Bradbury. I'm having a hard time living in my car here, but I relate to Ray Bradbury." And we're all looking around. He says, "Because we both love dinosaurs." How about that?
Yeah.
How about that?
Well, yes, absolutely. Many of us did growing up, and some of us retained it. But you mentioned Ray in the library. I just wanted to point out that when Ray was in his 20s, he would go to a library in Los Angeles that had typewriters where you put a dime in for every half hour. And that's how he did a lot of his early writing.
Oh, yeah.
He would just keep putting dimes in and typing, and dime and type some more. And then when he felt like a break, he'd go upstairs. I think this was in the basement. He'd go upstairs and just wander the aisles and pull out books that he wanted to check out and take home and read.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I relate to his defense of libraries, and as they evolve into, there's still a home for the homeless. That's why I brought up, and the poor who can't go to college. And he thanks libraries for his college education, Ray. Right. And this homeless guy, that blew our minds, including the librarian who said she was going to try to keep an eye out for him because Ray would have. And
it felt very appropriate.
A young man who was a Black man living practically on the street came in. He said, "I just saw this sign here, and I've read Ray Bradbury," and then he read a whole poem about the hardships of making it when you move to California with no money. And I felt Ray being with us at that point. He was
and it felt very appropriate, and as if we had his presence with us when we did this, when RBEM did this event a couple of weeks ago in the Waukegan Library for lack of an actual museum space. It was, in a sense, like we brought him home.
Tell me if I'm mistaken, but Waukegan is not quite the posh suburb that some of the others are up there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There's still that cross section. It's not everybody who's very comfortable that lives in Waukegan the way some of the others.
It's a lot like America, really. It's kind of a microcosm of America in certain ways.
I think the libraries, and the reason that Ray Bradbury, what they were a metaphor for Ray Bradbury, is this is where you can get a foot up if you're somebody who grew up like me,
And a kind of sacred space.
That too, yeah.
Yes. Any other thoughts or questions on the foghorn?
No, I don't see any. I think people
as I said, let us not forget that there is outer space, but there is also under space.
There's also psychological unconscious space.
That's right. And they go well together. I think you see that in this story. Yeah.
If you have any further questions and can't think of them right now, or of the other people, and they may write to me, you may still get some. But don't forget, by tomorrow, we should have this up and running. for both you and Jason and anybody who was here, if you want to share it. And I think I could pop up that office again if I can find it now. Where is it? Before we go, I want to put Ray's office back on the screen, and we will say goodbye with Ray Bradbury there. Can you all see Ray?
I can see Ray and what looks like a T-Rex. I see a Stegosaurus over on the right.
Yeah, you see, now we're with him. And he had to be, he might have been thought to have agoraphobia to some degree, because
Yeah.
he did get out, but he spent a heck of a lot of time in very enclosed spaces.
Right.
And so he felt that was his way of tapping his unconscious. He said, "I'll never starve here. I have so much food for thought in
Well,
this room."
That's a
Yeah.
child of the Depression talking too.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, guys, I'm gonna have to wrap it up, and let's hope we can do this again with both Jason and Paul, and maybe Paul and that other woman who's a great scholar of Heinlein. So thank you so much, and I'll be sending you something as a thank you. Take care, everybody.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Be well.
You
Stay
too.
safe.
Okay.